Swami Ji, Namaskar, Shalom, how are you?
Namaste. Thank you for having me, Rabbi.
It's good to see you. For me, this is um, a reciprocal visit. You were kind enough to host me at the Vedanta Center just a month ago, and we almost broke the internet with it. And now we're going to try and spread the light of Hanukkah using a different metaphor, uh, bringing light into darkness, which is what this time is about. And we're looking at the light and the darkness in the framework of humanity, the spiritual vision of humanity, how to apply it here. So we'll be as informal as possible, and I'll just start by asking you a simple question, and then we can spontaneously move around with it. So, what is the particularity of Hindu or Vedantic, and maybe it's a good thing for you to spell out the distinction, if there is a distinction, view of the human person within the broader understanding of creation or the purpose of life?
Well, first of all, thank you for having me, Rabbi. And it was indeed a wonderful event in New York when you were here, taking the conversation forward. And by the way, happy Hanukkah to everybody here. It's we have a corresponding festival of lights, Diwali in Hinduism.
But if I can interrupt you, when I arrived there, I wished I had a Diwali, and then I was told that we don't celebrate Diwali here. So the only thing you get this year for Festival of Light is this Hanukkah lighting today.
Yeah, that's true. So the human personality, when you think about this this subject, upholding human dignity in the time of conflict, for a Hindu or anybody who studied Hinduism like yourself, immediately it brings to mind the Bhagavad Gita. So it is set in the midst of conflict. It's set in a battlefield where Krishna, who is the incarnation of God, teaches Arjuna, who represents all of humanity. And in the middle of that battlefield, in the middle of conflict, basically what Krishna talks about is the nature, the human being in depth, what we truly are. And the teaching there is that we are not just flesh and blood. We are not even just intellectual, mental, or emotional creatures. In fact, we are not just persons. There's an impersonal dimension to each of us, and that is our deepest dimension. So this impersonal dimension is a divine dimension. That there is, at its core, the human being is divine. So this is the central teaching of the Bhagavad Gita, and this is the doctrine or the teaching of the Atman. The Atman means, the closest translation would be the soul, though the English word the soul is a little ambiguous, because you can speak of a good soul, where you mean a person is good, a good person, a moral person, well-behaved person, decent person. But you can also speak of a person's immortal soul, where you're speaking of something else now. You're speaking about the spiritual dimension in a person. So the Atman refers to that second sense of the English word soul, the so-called immortal soul, the spiritual part of ourselves. According to Hinduism, the unique thing, I think, which Hinduism teaches is that all human beings, irrespective of what you believe, man, woman, whatever gender you think you belong to, whatever you are basically, fundamentally, you are a spiritual being. There's this saying which I love, I've said it so many times, I don't know the source, but it goes something like this. We think we are human beings in search of spiritual experience, but the truth is that we are spiritual beings having a human experience. So Hinduism extends this idea beyond human beings. Hinduism says that all sentient beings are at their core spiritual. So when Krishna teaches Arjuna in the middle of the battlefield, they are surrounded by horses and elephants and whatnot. And all of them, all beings are basically this Atman, this spiritual reality. Should I go on with this, or you're muted?
Please go on.
Okay. One of the, and coming from most ancient times, the Bhagavad Gita, to the modern time, um, maybe the greatest spiritual teacher in modern Hinduism, Sri Ramakrishna, he defined a human being as he played on a word. He was very good at puns, but you have to work hard to translate it into English. In his native Bengali, he said, "What is a human being?" In Bengali and many Indian languages, the word for human being is manush, manush. But he played on that and he said, a manush is a manhush. It's a play on words. And what it means is awareness of our dignity. So he says a human being is a human being when this person is aware, conscious of his dignity as a human being. And in its depth, this human dignity is a spiritual dignity. We have to go back all the way back to the Upanishads, which are the foundations of Hinduism. And in the Upanishads, the central teaching is, it can be put in one sentence, that you are, or you are that, in Sanskrit, tattvamasi. So the human being is taught that you are divine. What does that divinity consist of? That you are, the Sanskrit formulation would be Satchidananda, existence, consciousness, bliss, which is an impersonal absolute. So what that means is we are in some sense profoundly mistaken about who we are or what we are. We are not, there are these bodies, these amazing biological machines, but that's all they are. They are machines. They do not define, we do not begin with the birth of this body, nor do we die with the death of this body. We are something more than and deeper than this body. So we are led into a process of investigation. This is one of the spiritual paths in Hinduism called the path of knowledge, where we investigate what we are, what is this human nature. And you start with the body because that's the most obvious. When you are asked, what are you? We naturally point to ourselves. This is who we are. But do you mean the body? And very soon we come to the realization, no, I don't literally mean this mass of flesh and blood. I mean, look, I'm a person, maybe an embodied person, but I'm a person. What does this person consist of? So we are brought to what we call the mind and thoughts and ideas and memories and emotions and intellect. And then we investigate. In Hinduism, there's this path of knowledge which teaches us how to investigate. And we begin to see that we cannot literally be these fleeting thoughts and emotions. Lots of feelings come throughout the day. Lots of ideas come. They come and go. As we go through life, we learn new ideas, new knowledge comes into us. We cannot be any one of them, nor indeed all of them. As we go further in this investigation, we find that whatever is an object, whatever we can be aware of, we are not that. So we are aware of the body, but we are not the body. The body is just another thing like anything in the world. We are not even the mind, the personality. As we investigate the human personality, we go beyond the personality to something which is not an object, which is not changeful, which is not what we might call insentient. We come to the very heart of sentience itself. You can call it awareness, you can call it consciousness. There are many, many words in Hinduism for it. Chaitanya, Chait in Sanskrit, for this non-object, pure subject, which we are. Now, that doesn't mean that you're not a person. You are the spiritual core. Now you're clothed in this personality for the time being, this changeful personality. And indeed, we are clothed in these material bodies. So the human being is the spiritual core plus what is called in Sanskrit a subtle body, which is mind and emotions and personality, and a physical body, which is this, which everybody has. So this is what a human being is. And the human being in its nature, in its true nature, is spiritual, is that pure consciousness, pure being. and to discover that and to be aware of that and to live our lives in that awareness and manifesting that awareness is what we might call the spiritual dignity of the human being. So this spiritual nature is not only just, who we are, this existence, consciousness, bliss, or this Atman, but also when you live it, spirituality has these two sides. One is a paradigm shift, this new knowledge which comes upon investigation that we are not the body mind, we are spiritual beings. And then living it. So spirituality is not just realizing something mystical, something transcendent, but also embodying it in life. So the qualities of an enlightened being, the fearlessness, the compassion, the self-sacrifice, the self-control, this tremendous integrity, all of these will come, are manifestations of the divinity within us. So spirituality, in the Hindu sense, would be the realization of our spiritual dignity and living it. These two sides to it.
Let me jump
Right.
in to both to clarify and to lead the conversation. So what you're saying is as follows, that in fact, the dignity of the human person is twofold. A, in the fact that the human being is inherently divine, possessing these qualities of consciousness, bliss,
Being
being,
consciousness. Yeah.
being consciousness and bliss. But the second is that remains potential until you realize, and that's where you said we are divine in a body rather than we're a body with a divine. So it's these two dimensions that give this particularity. And towards the end, you gave us a list of traits of what a person who is realizing these qualities is able to bring into the world: fearlessness, compassion, integrity, truthfulness, etc. Those are personality traits.
Yes.
What are the moral consequences of this worldview? In other words, once we know that, okay, one, obviously, you spoke about the fact that there's a path. There's a path of trying to realize this and to acquire that. So for those who are able to and to pursue it, so the moral implications are that you can actually grow in the awareness of that. But what are the moral implications in human situations from this recognition? In other words, now that we know that this is the human being, what does that mean in the following areas of life? And how does it translate morally into specific behavior patterns?
Yes. So the moral dimension is this. It is twofold. One is on your path to enlightenment, morality, truth, self-control, selflessness, compassion, these are helpful. These are instrumental. If we do not have them, if we do not stick to the truth, if we lack integrity, if we are indulgent, if we are violent, these traits will impede your spiritual development and indeed impede the manifestation of your spiritual nature. And the cultivation of these ethical qualities prepares one for eventual enlightenment. That's one side of the moral picture. The other side is, once one has that insight, that spiritual breakthrough, then these ethical traits are a manifestation of that spirituality. What was like a ladder or helpful or a struggle will now become a natural manifestation of your spiritual realization. This also means if we are profoundly mistaken about our real nature right now, and through spiritual struggle we come to realize who or what we are, and that is somehow profoundly connected with morality. Without morality, you cannot realize that. And a test of that realization is morality or ethics. So morality or ethics is not something that is secondary or at the level of manifestation. It's somehow profoundly connected to the ultimate spiritual nature of things.
But still, the way you presented it made it seem as though really the important thing is to reach that higher consciousness. And morality is part of the way there and part of the way back. but it's not morality or the ethical consequences that matter most. What matters most is reaching that state, and the other things are either part of the way there or part of the way back.
That is true, because if it is true, as it is claimed, that that reality, call it God, call it the real nature within us, the Atman, if that is the truth, and if it is true that we are profoundly mistaken, we are living in error, then we must break through, we must reach that truth. Otherwise, any other attempt, if you make morality the idol, that some standard of ethics, and that is central, and not God or Atman, then in the midst of error, in the midst of profound ignorance, we cannot but fail even to be moral. So morality, yes, it is instrumental to reach enlightenment, and it is a true test of enlightenment, God realization, of spirituality, if you will, not just a state which is final, but on the journey also, and on the other side, the manifestation of that. So, yeah.
So let me ask you then, having made that statement in principle, translate that for us into the kind of social, behavioral consequences of that realization. So once we know that the human person is divine, once we know the morality is closely bonded to that recognition, what does that look like in terms of its expressions in various fields of life? I'm leaving it intentionally vague, but I will narrow this down in a moment.
Yeah. Before I get into that, just one thing I want to raise is that, as you know very well, Hinduism is incredibly diverse. So what I was presenting here is one part of the tradition, the part which I am most familiar with, most comfortable with, that is the non-dual Hinduism. Now, there is a wide range of other Hindu approaches.
But they're not all immoral, are they?
No, none of them are, which is just like any other religion would say that no, immorality cannot be central or cannot be related to the truth. But there are other ways of presenting the truth. I just said that the spiritual nature of the Atman, that's our real nature. But there are multiple, in fact, the majority of Hindu approaches would bring in God at this point. So a supreme being who is the cause of this universe, with all the omni attributes, omniscient, omnipotent, omnipresent, and all of that. Yes, all these other schools of Hinduism also accept that at our core, we are divine. The Atman is there. That's our real nature. But after that comes a relationship between yourself and God. So that's another very important part of Hinduism, another, different ways in Hinduism. So there you would be expected not just to realize yourself as the Atman, but more importantly, to set up a relationship between yourself and God. And then there are a variety of possible relationships.
But at the end of the day, the value of the human person still derives from the same central factor. The differences would seem to be how to realize this recognition. In other words, I don't think those other schools, and I'm suppose you're referencing Dvaita Vedanta here, and more theistic views, such as, for instance, you would encounter in Hare Krishna or things like that. I don't assume that those particular schools differ on the fundamental view you offer. They only differ on the path to realize it, so that the core view doesn't really change, or does it change?
Yeah, I mean, there are huge metaphysical differences, but I just wanted to put it out there that there are these multiple approaches, and not all of them would agree with the way I am presenting Hinduism. But yes, coming back to how does it manifest in society, in our day-to-day life? It manifests as a recognition of the divinity of all beings, and that's central. So it doesn't matter whether really if you are a believing Hindu, or you believe in some other religion, or you don't believe in a religion, the fact remains that your core, you are basically divine. And it doesn't even matter whether you're human at the end of the day.
So just a second, all along we've been talking about humans being divine, and you've just made a shift to all beings. So that shift went very quickly for most viewers. Can you spend another moment on this, on the move from humans as divine, to all beings as divine?
Yeah, I did mention that when I talked about the Bhagavad Gita in the battlefield, when Krishna teaches that the inner divinity of all beings, there he includes all beings means all living beings. And this is something common to Hinduism and all the Indian religions, Hinduism, Buddhism, Jainism, Sikhism. The idea is this, that we are not primarily these bodies. So these bodies are human, but there are other bodies around. There are other living beings around. There are animals, for small and large. There are plants. So those bodies are very different, but they are also bodies. And what is embodied in them is what we call in Sanskrit sukshma sharira, which means a subtle body, which basically is what each of us is experiencing right now as the person we are. Quite apart from the body, in this body, we experience ourselves as thoughts, feelings, emotions, and perceptions, a sense of identity, ego. So this is imperceptible. This is not flesh and blood. This subtle body, this mind, this personality, if you will, this is there in every living being. Everywhere there is life, this is there. And these are what we call sentient beings, in Sanskrit, jivas. And they can inhabit different bodies. They can inhabit, right now, the sentient being which you are talking to is inhabiting a human body. But it could very well have, and according to our beliefs, it definitely has inhabited animal bodies earlier and multiple other living bodies. So the sentient being can exist in various kinds of living beings. Wherever there is life, there is sentience. In fact, the subtle body, which we call the sentient being, includes life, in Sanskrit, prana. So life is a flag that shows that there is a sentient being present there. What I said about the divinity within each of us, that goes beyond the subtle body, that even the subtle body is a body. It's not ultimately you. You are the Atman, and that Atman is there wherever there is a subtle body. And so everywhere in the world, in every living being, there is this Atman and a subtle body. So and then there comes the idea of multiple births, reincarnation. These bodies die, they are mortal. And once this body dies, the subtle body doesn't die with the physical body. This is what is this idea of the transmigration of souls. So the subtle body moves from one dead body to the next birth, another living body, to carry on its journey of spiritual evolution. And the whole point of the universe, of life, of this entire game is to aid us, aid all living beings, all sentient beings in their spiritual journey towards eventual enlightenment and freedom from this cycle of birth and death. So this is basically the picture, the big picture, which is shared by all Hindu schools, by Buddhists, by Jains, by Sikhs. Yeah, so that's what I meant by all sentient beings being, including all animals and plants also. So there's that spiritual dignity in all of them.
So having clarified that, what would the moral consequences and actual behavior be, as in view of what we now realize as a wider view of the divinity of all life forms?
Yes, but they're also the human being. So that sentient being in a human body, the human personality is unique. The spiritual reality is everywhere. In fact, not only in living beings, it's especially manifest in living beings, but it's also there in non-living things, wherever there is existence. So the very existence that the table and the chair share, there is a divine existence. Existence belongs to Brahman, or the ultimate reality. But among all existing entities, living beings are special because there is that the spark of sentience in them. They manifest more of that inner divinity. Among all living beings, the human embodiment is supposed to be even more special, because here, for the first time, we are able to manifest something which is not possible in animal or plant births. What is that? That is precisely the sense of spiritual dignity. That's why the subject today is so wonderful, being aware of or upholding the human dignity. So the spiritual dignity of the human being, this is unique. An ancient Sanskrit verse says that, talking about the speciality of human beings among all sentient beings, It says that fear, hunger, sleep, and sexuality, these are common to animals and human beings. What sets human beings apart from animals is dharma, is the ethical sense and the spiritual sense, eventual spiritual sense. They always go together. So this spiritual dignity is unique to human beings. Now your question was, how is it manifested in society? And now again, we are back to human beings, we're talking about human society. One of our great teachers, Swami Vivekananda, he gave some nice, interesting tests of this spiritual truth. He said one test of truth is selflessness. Wherever there is selfishness, there is evil. Wherever there is selflessness, that's a test of truth, that the spiritual truth is being manifested there. Then another test he gave was unity. So wherever there's division, there is evil. And wherever there is oneness or unity, there is the manifestation of that spiritual truth. Then another example he gave, another test he gave was strength. He said, reject all weakness as poison, manifest strength. The strength, manifestation of strength is a test of truth. Strength would be the whole range from physical to moral to intellectual, emotional to spiritual strength, all of that. Oh, by the way, another central part of this Hindu spirituality is oneness. It's the divinity within each of us, but also the oneness of all existence. So there is this one non-dual Brahman existence consciousness place, which manifests as this entire universe. So the heart of this manifold, of this enormously diverse universe, is a oneness. And the manifestation of this oneness is a true, in terms of how would you manifest oneness in this manyness? So the manifestation of oneness in our life would be harmony. It would not be, for example, reducing everything to a homogeneous uniformity. So, for example, Swami Vivekananda, he famously said that if any religion thinks that only that one will survive and every other religion will be destroyed, everybody will convert to one particular religion, well, they are sadly mistaken. That will never happen. Diversity is the very nature of life, whether it's language or religion or custom, whatever it is. Diversity is good. That is the very manifestation of life. However, that spiritual oneness, in the midst of this diversity, it should manifest as harmony. If it doesn't manifest as harmony, then there's a lack of spirituality there. And the conflict is a sure sign of that lack of spirituality. So, yeah, selflessness, strength, oneness, these are manifestations of that spirituality.
So this is a great point to interrogate you then.
Yeah.
Going back to the Gita, the situation of the Gita is one of a battlefield.
Yes.
So if I only heard you up to now, I would say that anyone who's engaged in warfare or in conflict is a sign of being unenlightened.
Mhm.
And anybody who avoids warfare and is a pacifist, that's a sign of his being enlightened. But I believe you had indicated that, in fact, the Gita gives us a different context for understanding the dignity of the human person in time of war. So maybe this is a good point then to examine what are the implications of this view of the human person precisely to situations of conflict rather than to the avoidance of conflict.
True. The avoidance of conflict, harmony, lack of conflict is actually a good thing. And the Bhagavad Gita is preceded, the war where the Bhagavad Gita is set, the great Kurukshetra war, is preceded by multiple attempts at peace. So Krishna, who is the incarnation of God, someone quipped, he should have taught spirituality to the bad guys. What's the use of teaching spirituality to the good guy? It would have prevented the war. But he did try. If you look at the Mahabharata, the wider epic in which the Gita is set, in the days preceding the conflict, Krishna did try to establish peace, but the other side, the bad guys, were not willing to give it any quarter at all. There's this famous incident which every Indian child knows, how the good guys, the Pandavas, they go and ask for what is rightfully theirs. And they ask for even 5 villages. Give us, they actually should have inherited the kingdom, but they want just 5 villages. And the other side refuses to give anything at all, no quarter at all. And of course, there's the question of morality. The other side represents all sorts of immorality and corruption, where the good people represent the forces of good, of morality, and God is on the side of the good. Now, in this situation, the student, the seeker, Arjuna, representing all of us, he actually comes forward with the pacifist statement, with the pacifist positions that I don't want to fight this war. I mean, he comes to fight the war with all conviction, and then he loses conviction in the middle of the war. He says that, and at the beginning of the war, he says, these are my cousins. It's a civil war. So these are my cousins. Why should I fight for a kingdom with them? I mean, we'll just end with death and destruction. Let them have the kingdom. Then Krishna steps in and he teaches Arjuna this, whatever I've been saying till now. You are not the body, not the mind, not even these people, all those who surround you. We are all the Atman, a spiritual being. And Arjuna's response is, good. That's what I've been saying. I want to realize this. I want to become enlightened. So I don't want to fight this stupid war. I don't want to be in the middle of that's the worst possible human endeavor, battlefield, war, killing, mass killing. And then Krishna shows him that you cannot avoid action. You cannot step back from action and become enlightened. That was a very big question in India for a long time, for centuries. It's a very strong monastic tradition where people are, by social custom and law, allowed to step out of society in pursuit of this central project of the Indian civilization, which I will call a spiritual project, attainment of enlightenment or moksha. And you are allowed to do that. So Arjuna wants to do that. And Krishna teaches a gospel of action there, that you cannot step outside of society. Why not? Because that's the wrong understanding of spirituality. If there is one spiritual reality, then what are you stepping out of? If you reject that as non-spiritual, what is it that you are rejecting as non-spiritual? After all, the central teaching, aren't you upholding the teaching of oneness, divinity and oneness, one divine oneness? So the battlefield, action, war also, and all kinds of human action, commerce and family life and education, all of that, it must be in some sense pervaded by this divinity which you are seeking. Now, how do we spiritualize action? Even that's why I think the Gita is set in the worst of all fields of human action, that is war, in the middle of that. And the conclusion is surprising. The teaching is not that you have to stop this war. This is, in fact, that stopping the war and retreating to a mountain, that's set forth by the student and as a wrong position, and that's corrected by the spiritual teacher. And he said, you must engage in action and spiritualize that action. However, I must point out here that that action needn't be violence and war. That's incidental. That's just the dramatic setting of the Gita. Because we mustn't forget Mahatma Gandhi, when he was fighting for the independence of India from the British colonial rule, he drew his gospel of non-violence, at least in large portion, he based it on the Bhagavad Gita. So it could have been very easy to take to the path of violent resistance against the British, but he drew his teachings of non-violent resistance against the colonial rule from the Bhagavad Gita.
How exactly did he do that? How did he turn the Gita into a source for nonviolence?
In a couple of ways. Centrally, because the teaching of the Gita is this spiritual oneness. So if it is this one spiritual reality, Atman or Brahman, then the British against whom you're fighting for independence, they too must be this spiritual reality. And that's why, although most of his life was in a struggle against British colonialism, whether in South Africa and later on in India, Mahatma Gandhi had any number of British friends. And there were large numbers of Englishmen and women who admired him, some of whom came and joined him in his struggle against colonialism. So he had no particular enmity or hatred for anybody, including the British. So oneness. Um, and the other side of it is that um, your struggle is basically the struggle to reach enlightenment. See, the one thing you have to understand about Gandhi is who he was. And he tells us in his own words. He says, when people ask me, who am I? Some people think that I am a freedom fighter, fighting for the freedom of my people from the British colonial rule. Some people think I'm a politician. Some people think I'm a social reformer, fighting against caste inequities and all that. All of which he was. And that's how history treats him. If you go to and read the school history that we read, Gandhi as a freedom fighter, Gandhi as a politician, Gandhi as a social reformer, educator. But he says, if you ask me who I am, and that's where the answer is amazing. He says, I'm a simple man in search of God. Gandhi says, I'm a simple man in search of God. So all that he was doing, his freedom struggle, his politics, his attempts at social reform and against untouchability, all the evils that plagued Indian society at that time, all of them, he saw them as his spiritual struggle to reach enlightenment. So that's how he transforms.
So if I try to understand how you put these two extremes together, in other words, the Gita's being delivered on the battlefield, on the one hand, which means, while it's a theory of action, it's also a theory of warfare, and Gandhi's attempt to draw just the opposite conclusion, and then the way you reframed it, I come up with the following outcome, and I'd like you to tell me if I'm bringing out a correct outcome from your words or not. In other words, fight if you must, but do not cultivate enmity in the process of the war. Is that a correct summary of the moral theory?
That would be true. And remember, the goal would be ultimately God or enlightenment.
So how does one reach God, or how does one reach God or enlightenment through a war?
Through, for example, Gandhi's war, it's pretty easy to see. By the very process of fighting for justice without enmity against those you're fighting against, that can clearly lead to it requires enormous discipline and sacrifice, and that can prepare a person for eventual enlightenment, which I'm sure is exactly how Gandhi saw it. In fact, he called his struggle satyagraha, a struggle based on spiritual truth. So nonviolence was a key component of that. But if you go back to the Gita itself, Krishna's advice was not, that the violence is symbolic. It's really a non-violent struggle for realization of the truth. No, he said that sometimes the violence is actually real. And so you have to fight this war as a war. See, the Bhagavad Gita can be interpreted in symbolic terms, and it has been. So the good guys are the forces of our moral forces, and the bad guys are the forces of immorality and evil. And there's a fight between good and evil. It's not really a war, that it's a spiritual battle which God urges us to engage in. And that's a perfectly good interpretation. But there is also the other interpretation, which is you just take it on its own terms, that there was actually a battle to be fought. And in that, the teacher urged his student to actually engage in war and fight that battle, leading to the victory of the good guys over the evil. So I answer here. One thing I'll bring in here. I happened to attend the class of Professor Amartya Sen. He's a Nobel Prize-winning economist, Indian, and an atheist, a declared atheist.
At Harvard.
At Harvard University in the philosophy department. And he was teaching this course on ethics. And I was a guest, but I got to attend and sit and listen to him carefully. And he said, I don't see how Gandhi draws his message of non-violence from the Gita, which is actually recommending violence. If you see the first chapter of the Bhagavad Gita, where Arjuna puts forth his arguments against the war. That, Arjuna shows graphically what the devastating consequences of the war will be. People, we will all die. Most of us will be dead. The families and the clans will be ruined. Society will be devastated. And then Professor Amartya Sen said, if you read through the Mahabharata to the conclusion of the war, you will see Arjuna was right. It did lead to devastating effects on society. So was Arjuna right or Krishna right? So that was his argument. I, of course, don't agree with that. I mean,
Did you tell him that?
no, I didn't. I was a guest. I didn't think at that age it would have made a much difference. He's more than 80 now. I think I'm quite set in his ways. Long ago, as a kid, he in his biography he mentions that in one of his books he mentions how he asked his teacher in India as a school kid that is it okay to disagree with Krishna in the Bhagavad Gita, and the teacher said yes, as long as you do it respectfully. So he's been an atheist, but a respectful atheist. He has absolutely no truck with religion, but he is a trained philosopher as well as an economist. He was at Cambridge University and now at Harvard. That position I do not agree with, because I mean, to borrow a term from economics, what is the opportunity cost? Suppose Arjuna had not fought that war. Suppose the good guys had lost that war. What would be society on those evil kings and rulers a generation down the line? Who knows? Yeah.
I want to ask you something. When you hosted me a month ago, the war had already been going on here, and he was this rabbi from Israel, and you were very anxious about political questions and being asked about the situation. I said, people want to ask. I'll take any question people want to ask. There's no point in hiding. So, and since this series right now, we're well aware of the fact that from where I'm sitting, I can hear the bombs. I can hear the explosions. So, I mean, it's part of our life here. So I want to share something with you and ask you to reflect on it, or maybe you'll account for it. I get messages from all over the world, people from all over the world and from all religions, and messages of support, sympathy. Thankfully, I don't think I've been attacked so much for the situation here. Striking is the support I get from India. Whereas when we turn to people in the West, typically the horrifying sights and images from Gaza lead people to do anything they can to want to stop that suffering, understandably so. People in India, I get this consistently. They say, no, you have to fight this battle to the end. God is with you. You be powerful, etc. Okay, it took a while for Hindus to understand there was Judaism. It took a while for Hindus to understand that there was Israel. For a long time, we didn't exist. We were just a branch of Christianity. But somehow, from what I can see, with that change having occurred now, I get, in the messages I receive, more support from India probably than anywhere else, or rather, more support from Hindus than anywhere else. How would you account for that in view of the conversation we've been having?
I won't give you a direct answer to that. And the reason I won't give a direct answer is the very reason why I wanted to avoid political questions when you visited us. I do completely agree with you that the spirituality and politics cannot be divorced. I mean, straight from the central teaching of my tradition, that there is one spiritual reality. So it can't exclude politics. Politics also must be a manifestation of that one spiritual reality. Whether it is Krishna or Gandhi, they were all master politicians in a positive sense. They were very much engaged with society. However, there's a specific reason why I want to avoid the whole thing is we as a monastic order, one of our mandates, or one of our part of our code, is to remain strictly non-political, just as the monastic order. Not those who are inspired by the teachings or those who practice these teachings. They are welcome and indeed encouraged to be political. That's fine. But as monks, it's a very clear no violation code that you do not enter into the sphere of politics. I think one reason would be that I'm sure monks would love politics. The monks, a monk is a special kind of creature where you set aside many of the other engagements of life so that time and energy is freed up for your pursuit of enlightenment and God realization. Now, enlightenment and God realization being very lofty goals, here you have these large bodies of monks or nuns who have plenty of time and energy at their disposal. A much greater temptation is politics. So, uh, being fully aware of that particular dangers of that particular temptation, our founders wisely told us to stay away from politics.
I need to challenge you on this in the same way that I respectfully disagreed. Like the teacher told Amrit Sen when he was young, I have to respectfully disagree with you. I think you're applying. I don't know if this goes to the core of the instructions under which you were formed. I also don't know at what point in the history of the Ramakrishna order these were introduced. If Swamiji already did, or this came later, you can answer that later. But I think this applies a very narrow view of politics. This applies, or maybe too broad a view of politics. To me, politics is the kind of haggling for power within a society. The kind of stuff that we see right now, that not RPG. I'm dominated by the wrong three-letter acronyms. BJP. Sorry about that. The kind of stuff that the BJP is coming under criticism for, the problem of Hindutva, the problem of what currently is going on in India. I can understand that people say this is where religion joins politics and this becomes problematic. That makes sense to me. But we're talking here with much more fundamental issues. We're talking about issues of justice, truth, survival, compassion, attitude to the other, just war, unjust war. How can you remain neutral to all these fundamental questions by covering them with the blanket of politics that's now become so broad and therefore also so thin that you lose your own moral voice in the process?
No, we don't remain neutral. There is very clear directions about what could be right and what is wrong, but you are free to draw your own conclusions from those principles and then apply them in your own context. But I want to bring in the other side of your question, which you asked about India and Israel, or the Hindus and the Jews. That's worth mentioning in this context, that I was at a joint Diwali Hanukkah celebration at the Indian consulate in New York a few years ago, and the Israeli consul general was there, and the Indian consul general was there. And the Israeli consul general, in his speech, he said that I meet the Jewish diaspora from across the world, from different countries, and often they have tales of sorrow about present or mostly past persecutions against the community, except from one country in the world, and that is India. The Jewish community in India has never faced persecution. In fact, they were regarded as just like anybody else in the Indian community, and that comes down from from nearly 2,000 years ago. The first wave of the Jewish immigration came after the destruction of the temple, I think 72 AD or 72 AD, yeah. And it has continued. And then commerce, there were Jewish merchants, traders who came and settled down in the south of India, in the east of India, and so on. Calcutta, near which our main monastery is located, Calcutta has a major street called Synagogue Street. And there are no Jews left at the present time. And a lot of people who live in that street, on that street, don't even know what a synagogue is. But yeah, so that shows that the Jewish diaspora has been present in India for a very long time, and very peacefully and very happily, without any kind of persecution. In fact, Swami Vivekananda, who was the first person to bring Hinduism to these shores, to the United States, to whose order we belong, he said in his landmark address at the World Parliament of Religions on 11th September, actually, 9/11, 1893, he said that we are proud to belong to a religion which has sheltered in its bosom the persecuted of all lands, of all peoples. It is to this land, that means to India, that the Israelites came when their temple was destroyed by Roman tyranny, and they have stayed in India ever since. So yeah,
So the Jews definitely have enjoyed this, and I think this is one of the reasons why Jews have a much easier time exploring Hinduism than they do Christianity, because of this lack of persecution. And there are definitely these friendly feelings, but are these friendly feelings enough to justify the moral stance that Hindus are taking on the present war here?
Well, you're still pushing on a political question. I'm going to just keep avoiding it. But yeah,
And just to fully corner you and to realize that you don't want to be cornered, you refuse to recognize that there's a moral question here, and you're taking the question that we consider to be a moral question and seeing it as political and therefore brushing it aside. Is that the status quo of the conversation?
No, it isn't. I am refusing, in a very Nagarjunian sense, the great Tibetan, the Indian Buddhist philosopher, the emptiness guy, who would say that he says that all views are inherently empty. And somebody said to him, "So your view is empty too?" He said, "No, if I had a view, it would be empty. But because I do not have a position, you cannot refute me. I can refute all positions." And so, is that a position that can be refuted? No, because it's not a position. It's a kind of jujitsu where you use the force of the opponent against the opponent. But yeah, let me put my cards on the table. It is a moral position. I think it's not some ancient principle of tolerance and acceptance because of which you see this enormous outpouring of support from Indians for Israel in its present predicament. It's also a moral position. It's also a support for what is perceived as the underdog in this situation. I think there are a lot of political, ideological issues because of which moral sense gets confused across the world. And I see it a lot here in the United States right now. And there are various ideological cross currents which are coming together in some strange ways, which prevent people from getting some moral clarity, at least on this issue. Where Indians, I think by and large, have that, at least for this present issue. And that's why you're seeing this enormous outpouring of support. And there are also less elevated reasons for that. But anyway.
Well, I'm glad that by persevering in this line of questioning, you made what I think is a very important statement, for which I'm grateful. And you succeeded in making it with such emptiness that no one can refute you. So I'm getting messages that I have to stop, because I actually had several other questions I wanted to follow up with, but we are time-bound creatures, and we've had a very rich conversation, and I'm told that we want to move this into the prayer mode. So let me just ask you before we do so, is there anything further on any of the topics that you see us having gone around that you would want to add to this conversation, that you feel you haven't expressed yourself on adequately, or want to clarify, or anything you want to add?
Just this one thing. When I speak about the spiritual oneness of all things, and you ask questions about the manifestation in terms of morality, in terms of ethics, the Hindu view, ethics is grounded in that spiritual oneness. It is because we are all one, then it stands to reason that I must love my neighbor as myself. I must not be violent or have feelings of enmity against anybody. In fact, from our perspective, all of ethics is, in a fundamental sense, explained and justified by this spiritual oneness.
So here's what I'm going to do, and I hadn't planned on doing that, but I think you just gave us a wonderful statement. And as Peter mentioned, we in her introductory words, we take this into prayer. So I know we have two prayers, plus her Hanukkah lights, that are going to be offered henceforth. But I'd like for the two of us to conclude our part of this by respectively offering prayers that affirm the sense of the unity of all, which would have to be the basis of our living. Because ultimately, the message, including the message of how to go through social strife and warfare, is the message of unity. Can I ask you then to share a prayer in that light? While you're doing that, hopefully I'll be inspired to pick a Jewish counterpart and then we'll move on to the other people who've been lined up to offer prayerful contributions.
Just give me a second.
So what you see now on the screen next to you is that emptiness that Nagarjuna was talking about. So emptiness is basically when the Swami gets up and all you get to see is the chair, and you cannot contest the chair at all.
All right. I think I have just the prayer. I'll chant the Sanskrit and give a free translation of that. This is the first prayer in the prayer book, and I think this is a collection of ancient and medieval Hindu prayers from various sects. Here goes. Om sarve atra sukhinas santu sarve santu niramaya sarve bhadrani pashyantu ma kaschid dukkham apnuyat. Let all beings be happy. Let all beings be free of suffering. Let all beings see what is auspicious. Let sorrow and affliction come to none. Sarvastaratu durgani sarvo bhadrani pashyatu sarva sadbuddhimapnotu sarva sarvatra nandatu. Let all beings overcome obstacles and difficulties in their lives. Let all beings see what is auspicious. Let all beings be blessed with right understanding. Let all beings delight everywhere. Dujjana sajjano bhuyat, sajjana shantim apnuyat, shanto muchyeta bandhebhyo, muktaschanyan vimochayet. Let the wicked become good. Let the good attain to peace. Let the peaceful be freed of bondage, and let the freed free others. Om, peace, peace, peace.
Thank you, Swamiji. You spoke earlier about the fact that many Hindus will bring God into the equation as part of this affirmation of unity in the spiritual path. And in this sense, Judaism employs a much more theistic language, and especially so in its prayers. And I'm going to read a part of our high holiday liturgy that we actually conclude our 3 daily prayers with, which is an affirmation for the doing away of evil and knowing God as the source of all unity, and the affirmation that in his kingdom, he will be one, his name will be one, and we will all be united. And this, of course, also ties into part of the message of Hanukkah, because in Hanukkah, we take the lights, we put them on the outside of the home. So in a sense, we're radiating. You'll see later when Pita lights, you'll see her lights are at the windowsill so that they radiate outwards. So it's not just bringing the light inwards, it's bringing the light outwards. And that light is also the light of unity, especially tonight when the candelabra is full. We have all 8 lights. So that goes back to the theme that you spoke earlier from Vivekananda about that multiplicity and diversity. So all that menorah itself is a symbol of the multiple lights that are part of one radiation of the divine, affirming that higher unity. So I will read this prayer, and the last part I'll pseudo sing as it is done in the synagogue. I don't count this really as a song, but it gives a taste of what it sounds like in the liturgy. Therefore, we hope to you, Lord our God, that we may speedily behold the splendor of your might, to banish idolatry from the earth, and false gods will be utterly destroyed, to perfect the world under the sovereignty of the Almighty. All mankind shall invoke your name, to turn to you all the wicked of the earth. Then all the inhabitants of the world recognize and know that every knee should bend to you, every tongue should swear by your name. Before you, Lord our God, they will bow and prostrate themselves, give honor to the glory of your name. They will all take upon themselves the yoke of your kingdom. May you soon reign over them forever and ever, for kingship is yours, and to all eternity you will reign in glory. As it is written in your Torah, the Lord will reign forever and ever. And it is said, the Lord shall be king over the entire earth. On that day, the Lord shall be one, and his name one. V'ne'emar l'hayadonai למלך על כל הארץ, Bayom hahu yeh Adonai echad u'shemo echad. Just by way of clarification, the Spirit doesn't speak necessarily of the alienation of other religions, but of everything that is false and idolatrous, so that we come to the knowledge of the one God who unites all of humanity. And with that, I thank you, Swamiji, for a very rich conversation. And I pass the microphone on to Pita, who will guide us through the final part of our session today.
Thank you so much. What a wonderful conversation and so many ideas. And we will continue to talk about this topic and build on these ideas in the coming weeks. Thank you so much, both of you. It's now my pleasure to invite our friend and colleague, Fawzia, who's in Toronto, I believe. I hope you're in Toronto tonight. I'm not misleading people, who will lead us in a Muslim prayer. Thank you, Fawzia. And you'll need to unmute. There you
go. Good morning. Salam alaikum. Shalom. Namaste. Greetings to everybody from Toronto. I feel very humbled to be in this group right now with Swami and the wise words that he and Alon have just spoken. Just a common lay person. So please take what I say and share with you in that way. So I'd like to just start just before I say the prayer with some words from a Palestinian child in Gaza. I will just speak his words. And he says, he's an 8 or 9-year-old child, he looks like. And he says, "We are dreaming of a truce. I'm a refugee in a school and I wish to return home. Wake up in the morning, go to a clean bathroom, to go out, get dressed, wear nice clothes, and play football with my friends. Not wake up to terror and go to sleep with fear." Each one of us, everywhere around the world, and absolutely in the Holy Land, is feeling, understanding, acting, and reacting to everything we see, hear, feel in different individual manner, differently in public with the people around us, and differently in private in our own living rooms. I'd like to connect that reality for each one of us as individuals to two characteristics of God, as we call them, the names of God, that our scholars and our spiritual leaders to Muslims have been asking us to remember and these names in our prayers. The two characteristics are Ya Salam, which means the giver of peace, and Ya Latif, which is a name of and a characteristic of God, shortly described as, oh, the subtle one. And it means the one who is gentle and affectionate, gracious and understanding, with regard for the subtle details of individual circumstances. And it is one of the verses in the Quran where it is mentioned, this name, Ya Latif, is in Surah Mulk, which is the 67th chapter of the Quran. And God says in that verse, whether you speak secretly or openly, God surely knows best what is hidden in the heart. How could he not know his own creation? For he alone is Latif, the most subtle, all aware. So with that, I would just like to repeat and do what I have done previously when Pita has asked me to share something with you from the Muslim perspective, is to take my rosary and repeat. Maybe we can repeat just 10 times. Ya Salam, the giver of peace, and we call out to him to bring his peace into our hearts. And Ya Latif, O subtle one, the one who is gentle, affectionate, gracious, and understanding with regard to the details of our hearts and our own individual circumstances. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. We begin in the name of God, the most gracious, the most merciful. Ya Salam, Ya Latif, 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 Ya Salam, Ya Latif.
Thank you. It actually behooves all of us to think of those qualities of the Almighty. Thank you so much, Fawzia. It's now my great pleasure. We've gone from Toronto. Karen, I'm not 100% sure where you are at the moment, so maybe you will tell us exactly where you are. Are you in Stockholm? I'm not sure where you are, so you'll tell us. But it's my great pleasure to invite Reverend Karen Ekblom, who is the minister at the Swedish Theological Institute, the pastor at the Swedish Theological Institute in Jerusalem, when she hasn't been evacuated, and we're looking forward to her urgent, quick return to us in Jerusalem. Karen, thank you.
Karen, there's a terrible glare of the screen on your glasses. So either remove your glasses, that's better, yeah.
I'll try to manage without them. Thank you, Peter, and thank you, Alon. Thank you, Swami, for feeling connection, even though we are far away from each other, but the oneness I can feel, which is so important these days. I am in Stockholm, Peter, thank you. But I am on my way to Jerusalem. So soon I will be with you all again, which I'm really looking forward to. But being in Sweden also has meant that I have the opportunity to meet with a Christian delegation with church leaders from Ukraine the last days, and hearing their stories and witnessing from the war, from the invasion in eastern Ukraine. So I have a lot of witnesses, heavy stories from the war. And I also, of course, have witnesses almost every day from the war in Israel and Palestine. So this is unfortunately the topic that we need to pray for even more during these times. So with my friends in Israel and Palestine and in Ukraine and friends all over the world, we come to God and we turn to God in a prayer for victims of war all over the world. God, you know and hear their suffering. And tonight we pray especially for the people of Ukraine, the people of Israel and Palestine. We pray for those who are caught in the midst of these wars. We pray for those who mourn their dead or who live in anxiety for missing friends and family. For those who have been kidnapped and those suffering from a humanitarian catastrophe. Injured, homeless, starving. Those who have become refugees abroad or in their own country. Oh God, we pray for the children. We pray for the children who are affected, whose lives are overshadowed by war. May the children be spared by its horrors. We prayed for parents, teachers, and other adults who take care of these children. Give them strength to bring these children love and hope for a future in peace. God, we ask you to help leaders of politics and faith to walk the path of peace and mutual understanding. Grant them your wisdom and the courage to take necessary measures to open the path to hope and a peaceful future for the sake of us today and for future generations. And we pray for those who patiently work for peace and dialogue, who have a vision of a new society where people can live together in mutual understanding and reconciliation. We pray for a just peace, where the value and dignity of creation and humanity are respected. Let all those voices be heard who can form a new way of living together. May your will, O God, form a future where power and resources are shared justly, and be with all those who work for democracy and equality. O God, you who make all things new, when both the present and the future seem to be shattered, we ask for signs of hope in the midst of the seemingly impossible. Fill us with a belief in the future and in mutual fellowship. Give us grace to be instruments of peace, and grant us the peace that we cannot of ourselves create. Amen.
Amen. Karen, we're all moved. I'm very privileged here, as some of you might have noticed, to have grandchildren here, and my husband Alon, whom some of you know. And they're going to light the candles. But Karen, your words and then Fauzi, you quoting a child, it just makes us appreciate so much when we can have our children and grandchildren in safety. And that when we pray and praying together in Jerusalem together in person, which we do monthly still, we always finish our event with saying that we have two sides to our final prayer or final circle. One is the prayer for those who are in need, as both you, Fausia, and Karen, you spoke about. And the second is the prayer of gratitude for the blessings that we have, and balancing those two sides. And you've really brought that home to me this evening, both of you, but also in the previous conversation, those two sides. So I appreciate so much my blessings of having grandchildren here with me, who, by the way, understand not a word of this because these two don't speak any English, but that I hope they can feel the gratitude. We're going to light, Alon mentioned that the candles are lit at the window. So Aaron's going to light a Chanukiah at the window, which is the official one. It's to the street. But because I couldn't make the camera or the sound go all the way there, I'm going to light another one right here in the middle of the room. There's no limit to the number of Chanukiot that can be lit in a household. In fact, to fulfill the mitzvah, the commandment, you only need to light one candle. But we all light, building from night to night, from the first night, as you saw here last week, one candle, and the last night, the 8 candles, plus an extra candle, an additional candle, that is the one that we use in case we should want to use the lights of the Hanukkah candle to see with. We're not allowed to do that because they are there to be something above and beyond our practical life. And Swami's words about the spiritual life, you should be aware, for those who are not Jewish and perhaps don't know the tradition, that for us, 7 is the number of completion, of reality, of total. 7 days in the week God created in 7 days. And the number 8 is the extra level, beyond the practical, the spiritual level. It's in another realm already. So joining us on the 8th night of Hanukkah, you're joining us when we reach that high of being beyond the practical, beyond the real. We're on another plane tonight. So I'm going to stand up. I hope that you can still hear me clearly. I'm going to ask Berry to get up from the couch and stand with me. Berry, and we're going to light the candles for you. And I hope between our voices, Aaron will shout. He's got a much better voice than I have, but we'll both say the blessing for the candles and we'll both light the candles. Okay, let's light a candle. Idali, את רוצה להפסיק את הנר? ליבה. גם לך, אוקיי. אני אגיד לך כמה. את תפסיקי והוא ידליק לפחות את What are we talking?
או הסבתא זה...
Say that, say that.
קודם הברכה.
Okay. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher קידשנו במצוותיו וציוונו להדליק נר חנוכה. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam שעשה ניסים לאבותינו בימים ההם בזמן הזה. הנרות הללו שאנו מדליקים, הנרות הללו שאנו מדליקים, הניסים ועל הנפלאות ועל התשועות ועל המלחמות אשר עשית לאבותינו, שעשית לאבותינו בימים ההם, בימים ההם, בימים ההם בזמן הזה.